Yeah. So when we speak about trauma, there's the individual, the ancestral, and the collective layer.
So 3 layers.
And they all sort of dance together in different ways. One of the symptoms of trauma, and collective trauma in particular, is that the space for choice narrows. So for many people, the choice was to stay in a country that's at war, under sanctions, with the highest hyperinflation in world history, with ethnic cleansing going on, and death and rape and all the horrible things that have happened in the 90s. And I don't use those words lightly, because that is what was happening. If there's a transgression of the law of life, an ethical restoration is required, and time does not heal. Time does not play a factor. And in a very real way, I am my ancestors. My hands are my grandfather's hands or my grandmother's hand. They're living in me. It's not like they're out there somewhere. I'm the latest model of them. And life is moving through me and looking for ways to heal and integrate whatever was too much or too little for them, which is the definition of trauma. My conviction is that the worst idea in human history is we are better than them, because that then leads to othering. Because if I'm better than you, then you're not like me, and I can other you. In trauma language, it's othering. And once you other someone, then it's justified to do anything to them. But we're in a space of hot trauma where stimulus and response are almost glued together. And it's almost impossible to distinguish them, almost by definition, in a space of hot trauma, because you're wondering, like, am I safe? So there's a massive polarity currently between us and them in the two sides. And the bigger the polarity is, the more the tension is between. Like we are right and they're wrong. We're humans and they're animals. Or we're right and they're wrong. We're the victims, or we're the victims, or we're the victims. Like who's the bigger victim? Like you can sort of go into. And by taking a side, energetically, you add to that polarity. So in a sense, taking a side does not move us to the next level, which is simply ceasefire. It makes it more difficult, because it adds fuel to the fire of like, yes, and the outrage. It doesn't mean the outrage is not justified. It's absolutely justified. Desmond Tutu and Mandela ran the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process in South Africa. You cannot run that place from outrage. Of course, having said that, this is extremely, extremely deep. I mean, I'm from the Balkans, and our trauma is, thousands of years, and it's very, very deep. But when I've connected through some of my friends on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side, and my partner is Palestinian, some of my best friends are Israeli, I was just like, wow, this is astoundingly deep. Like, I'm just in disbelief of how deep it is. And in some way, when we say the Holy Land, it's so deep that if this polarity, if this tension is resolved in the Middle East, it's resolved on behalf of in the entire humanity.
Hello, 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 and welcome to the Enlightened DXB podcast. I'm your host, Erica, and I'm very, very excited because today I have a dear friend, Nikola Jurisic, with me today. And I think I said that right. He was introduced to me originally by a mutual friend who described him as a spiritual warrior. And what's beautiful about that is the Enlightened DXB podcast has been made for spiritual warriors to get transmissions from brilliant minds, beautiful hearts, and people who are doing great things out in the world. And so, Nikola, I'm so, so grateful that you're here today.
Yeah, super happy to be here.
Yeah.
And look forward to our conversation.
Yeah. Maybe we can start with 3 deep breaths together.
Always a good way to start.
Yeah. And if everyone else can join us, whether you're listening or watching, we're going to take a deep in-breath. And another in-breath. We're just holding at the top to whatever feels comfortable. We're going to do this a 3rd time. Try and make some noise on your way out. Beautiful. It's amazing what 3 breaths can do.
I know.
So Nikola, you have such a beautiful background, and I would consider you someone who has one of the sharpest minds that I know, and is using it or is propelled by your heart and your spirit. And we're going to talk about some big topics today, primarily an area that you're deeply passionate about collective trauma. But first, I just wanted people to get the lay of the land of the work that you're doing in the world right now. You've got Transfiguration Advisory, which I think is doing amazing stuff, and Project Light, and so many things under that umbrella that's impacting social change and addressing collective trauma, specifically in the Balkans. Can you speak a few minutes into, what you're doing out in the world today and what moves you?
Yeah, well, what moves me is this dedication to creating a lighter and more beautiful life in the Balkans. I am from the Balkans. I was ancestrally from the Western Balkans. All my ancestry is from that part of the world, which is Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia. I was also born in the Balkans in Yugoslavia. And I just feel a very deep connection to that land. And doing what we can to, let's say, lighten the burdens of the past, but also create alignment from which people can sense into different futures, different pathways. You can call it step into the different timeline. You can call it believe the change is possible. You can call it moral imagination, reclaiming our power to imagine more beautiful moral futures. So that's the primary, let's say, driver. And I've been doing that in the corporate world for about 20 years now. So doing culture change in the corporate world, leadership development, culture change. And I've had the great pleasure of accompanying Saudi Arabia through that process from 2008 still to today. Working with many senior leaders, beautiful humans that are bringing heart into the workplace. And creating more positive and productive workplaces. And then, of course, in the Balkans, we have our Inner Social Impact platform, where we work with projects that contribute to this collective end in that part of the world.
Can you speak into, for those of us who aren't familiar with the Balkans, the history of the Balkans, and how it personally, this sort of collective trauma, specifically in the Balkans, what is that? And how has it affected you personally growing up in Serbia?
Yeah. So when we speak about trauma, there's the individual, the ancestral, and the collective layer.
So 3 layers.
And they all sort of dance together in different ways. So I would say that I've been blessed that it hasn't affected me directly, individually. Actually, most people who were affected by the war and the fall of Yugoslavia in the 90s were affected vicariously or indirectly. And so was I. So
speak more into that indirect impact.
So one of the symptoms of trauma, and collective trauma in particular, is that the space for choice narrows. So for many people, the choice was to stay in a country that's at war under sanctions, with the highest hyperinflation in world history, with ethnic cleansing going on, and death and rape and all the horrible things that have happened in the 90s. And I don't use those words lightly, because that is what was happening. It's not like I'm using that word to point to try to exaggerate the point. That's exactly what was happening, unfortunately. And to stay in that environment or to leave. And that's not much of a choice. So we chose to leave. We were one of the quote unquote lucky ones, but I would have personally preferred to stay, as many people would have, because it was a beautiful country to live in. I mean, my experience growing up in Yugoslavia was very, very beautiful. We had the value of unity, which was an underlying value in the whole country. And after 40, 50 years of the practice of these two values of brotherhood and unity, there was quite a fair amount of coherence in the society, and also a lot of equality. It's something I haven't experienced anywhere else in the world, this sense that no one has too much, everyone has enough, and it's this sort of really beautiful, supporting energy that you feel, this coherence, this unity that you feel in the space. And obviously, we live in a world now where disparities when it comes to economic inequalities in particular are higher than they've ever been before. And that really creates, on a more subconscious level, like tension in the background. So
I'm curious, back then, when digging back into your memories, would you consider it also, when you use the word like equity, was it also felt amongst the masculine, feminine? There's this perception that I have that it might have been a very strong patriarchy.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, in certain aspects, the feminine energy was more integrated than in other parts of the world. So, for example, the flavor of socialism that was there was very much democratic. So all the workers, when it was being decided whether she should go to the London School of Economics, because she was studying in the Institute of Economics and working in the Institute of Economics, the workers and the cleaners and all the staff had a say. And if they said, no, we shouldn't spend money on sending her to university for her PhD or master's, we should increase wages, that's what happened.
Oh, wow.
And that's actually how the whole system was governed. All the state-owned companies were governed that way. And that's sort of an aspect that you could say is more inclusive. It's less top-down. It's more bottom-up, it's more grassroots. In that sense, it's more feminine. So there were, I would say, aspects. And also, I guess, the equality itself, there was more of a balance between different social classes. It wasn't such an extreme, every man for himself and let's just sort of try to accumulate and be as successful. There was more of this common field that was there in the space. But yeah, I never thought about it from that lens, but at least in those two ways, it was more balanced. Of course, there was a lot of wounded masculine energy there as well. That was like, Tito himself was, who was the leader of Yugoslavia. He created Yugoslavia. Marshal Tito, he was also quite an egocentric man, from what I hear. In the sense that he had to come first, and and in ways he had a huge ego. But he was also in the crew with like Castro and Idi Amin and these sort of leaders, Nasser and Nehru. These sort of, they were the crew. Like, they would gather and smoke Cuban cigars and decide on, who should sell which weapons to who. And they were the leaders of the non-aligned movement, right? So there was a different phase in history entirely. So there was a lot of that as well. And I guess a part of the reason why the system collapsed, when I was looking into it, is one is this dark lake of trauma that was never addressed. Even how Tito came to power in Second World War was very bloody. And First World War was very bloody. The Balkan Wars were very bloody. In many ways, the Turkish occupation over 300-400 years was also bloody. So there was a lot of history to be dealt with and reckoned with, which was never done. So that was a part of it. And a part of it was also this, let's say, decay of this old system, that it was sort of a system founded based on the victory of the partisans at the end of the Second World War. In the Balkans, the country came together, but there wasn't much renewal energy. It was very much sort of the same type of behaviors, the same type of energy. It needed to evolve, which it really hasn't. And the leaders that stepped in after Tito, unfortunately, were even, let's say, even more power-centered, or even less capable as leaders, in the sense that they're stewards of the evolution of the whole, and their own needs are secondary compared to their connection to the whole and making decisions from the whole to evolve the system.
So we've had on the show someone come on talk about sort of family constellation and ancestral trauma, how that can pass down from 7 generations. And I'm curious, what is the difference between ancestral trauma and collective trauma? Because it sounds like in a place like the Balkans, where, as you said, there's this history of war and just so much pillaging and so much of this heavy density, this dense energy. Yeah. That gets passed on ancestrally over 7 generations, but as like a collective people.
Yeah, it's actually in the Slavic mythology. It's 16 generations that are considered, and we have names for each generation, like parents, grandparents, all the way to 16 generations.
Oh, wow.
And the bee is actually the symbol of the 16th generation that completes the entire cycle. But indeed, research has also shown that this, at least in animals or in rats, this is epigenetic transmission of trauma. So if I'm here, then I have 2 parents, right? And if you're drawing these geneograms, right, and then they have 2 parents, and they have 2 parents. So that line, as it branches out, is my ancestral line. And the collective is then looking across them. So also in my own generation, but in the 2nd generation, in the 3rd generation, and obviously each generation is, the more recent it is, the fresher it is. But there's also a belief that says, we spoke about this before, if there's a transgression of the law of life, an ethical restoration is required, and time does not heal. Time does not play a factor. And in a very real way, I am my ancestors. My hands are my grandfather's hands or my grandmother's hands, as the famous trauma book is called. So they're living in me. It's not like they're out there somewhere. I'm the latest model of them. And life is moving through me and looking for ways to heal and integrate whatever was too much or too little for them, which is the definition of trauma. Too little food, the Irish potato famine, and all the research that's been done there to show that how that famine has affected generations after. Too little love, too little time, or too much judgment, too much drive, too much effort, too much whatever it might be. So in a way, going from the individual to the ancestral line, and then the collective is, so you can think of it as if I'm here, the y-axis is the ancestral, and the x-axis across all the different generations is the collective.
Interesting. And then within collective trauma, I've heard you speak about before that there are many types, and there's 4, what would you call them, disruptions in particular?
I've called them, there's many ways to look at this, but I've called them disconnections. So, we live in relationship. We exist only in relationship. If you have one planet in space, as Alan Watts in one of his lectures, he has this like one planet in space floating. It's just like you have no reference point. But only when you have another planet to it, you can see what is close, what is far, which direction is it moving in. But if you have just one planet, you have no idea. Is it moving at light speed, or is it standing still, or there's no reference point?
Right.
So we quite literally are defined by our relationships. So in that sense, there's 4 fundamental, let's say, disconnections of healthy relationship, wounding of healthy relationship that...
on a collective level.
Yeah, on a collective level.
Can you speak into them?
Yeah, so let's see, what do we start with? So
maybe with the one you think is oldest.
Oldest, well, interesting. Probably the oldest would be the patriarchy. And this, let's say, power over structures, effort over relaxation. How does it show up in society today? We tend to value action over rest. And there's a whole science of stress and recovery, if we wanted to get into the scientific part of it, that shows that, our nervous systems are generally upregulated, as a society. And of course, that's okay for a period of time, but then when you look at all the research, prolonged exposure to serotonin, prolonged exposure to cortisol, prolonged exposure, it has its effects.
And on the sort of, to simplify it as much as possible, we would describe patriarchy as the masculine energy overpowering the feminine energy.
Yeah. I would say the unhealthy masculine, like too much of the unhealthy masculine, because of course both feminine and masculine energy can have a healthy expression and an unhealthy expression. So we've somehow come to, let's talk about leadership, right? In leadership, one of the key challenges is delegation. How to empower people, too much hierarchy. A lot of my clients, when we do culture assessment, hierarchy ends up being one of the top 10 values, in particular in the region. And there is, this sort of power over structures, telling people what to do. And often it comes from frustration. All trauma responses are ultimately, an attempt at an adjustment. They're intelligent systems. But patriarchy is one in particular. Then it somehow got tied into religions and got tied into, the business world, and it's sort of perpetuated very much structurally. It shows up in relationships between people, and of course, it's ultimately the balance of both of these energies that we are looking for inside of us, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that is there is this, let's say, lack of comprehensive understanding that, let's say, when we're looking for more gender equality in organizations, that means more women in senior management roles and more women on the board. And that's great, but if these women are bulldozers in terms of their energy is 90% masculine, then it doesn't really help. It doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah.
And therefore, we meet the KPI, but nothing changes, because ultimately it needs to be the balance of both energies within us. And to make it really, really simple, it's how much time do you spend in action, and how much time do you spend resting?
Yeah.
Right. But of course, that's a vast oversimplification, because these are archetypal energies that show up in so many different realms. But there's definitely disbalance there.
Yeah, I feel this one so personally because I've reflected on my corporate career, and I think back on who I really loved having on my team and who I promoted and who I hired. And I often hired women who sort of performed like I did, which I now recognize was hyper productive, hyper focused, and it did not, there was almost a decade and a half, if not more, where I really did not prioritize rest. It was like, rest, you can do that when you're dead, and I really feel into that, and I feel really sad when I think back, because I used to think, I'm this woman that's really trying to promote other women in the workforce, but I was just another vessel of masculine energy.
Yeah, we were just doing a workshop recently with some clients, and it was a manufacturing environment, and one particular member of the top team made it all the way from being like a non-supervisory, on the front line in the production environment. She was like the first woman to be allowed into that masculine space that only men, and people would tell her, you're never going to be able to have babies, you'll never find a partner, all of that. And now, she made it to the very top of this production organization. And one other team member was recently saying you're a tigress, you're amazing. And she was like, I don't want to be a tigress anymore. I'm tired for fighting for my place. And, after 20 years of fighting to move up the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of one aspect to look at these energies, but we can also look at them. Let's take another aspect. So if these energies are true, if this is archetypically, let's say, accurate, then it should show up in different fields. So for example, when we look at the field of leadership, of course, the research shows the same, and it's not called effort and rest and the science of stress and recovery, which is what it's called in the well-being space. It's called task-relationship balance. So all leaders need to balance the achievement of the task with the development of the relationship. Achievement, decisiveness, strategic focus, these types of competencies with the competencies of caring, connection, connectedness, coaching and mentoring, fostering team play, and so on. And I'm using the leadership circle profile as one of the leading global frames on leadership, but it's generally accepted that good leaders are able to manage both. Again, task masculine, relationship feminine.
Yeah.
Same thing. We don't need to get stuck on the words.
Yeah.
We can go through 5 or 6 different other contexts in which these energies play out, but we're giving maybe just some examples to point to the fact that, there's a disbalance. Most work happens more on the task side. We need to achieve. We need to get our KPIs, and less energy is invested by leaders in building care and connections.
Beautiful. Now talk to me a little bit about this disconnection, this collective trauma of disconnecting the spiritual world to the material world.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting one. So let me maybe say that there's good reason for it.
Describe it first.
Yeah, describe the disconnection.
Yeah.
So the disconnection between, so most wisdom traditions have a concept of saying humans live in 2 different realms, or let's say in Orthodox Christianity, you say there's the earthly aspect and the heavenly aspect of a human experience. Or you can even say there's the mind and there's the body. Ultimately, you and I are connected to something, we're having some thoughts, something's moving through us. And we also have the physical experience here.
Yeah.
We have something that's beyond just the physical.
Or I know in a lot of the circles we move in now, a lot of people talk about the spiritual realm, or the realm of spirits, and the realm of the matrix that we live in. Right. Everything physical that we see and material things.
Again, it's an archetype, so it shows up in all different realms. So if we look at physics and say if it's true, it should also show up in the science of physics, right? Yes, it's maybe in the more like spiritual circles, you might say, okay, we're the spiritual hippies, and then we have the kind of the wounded matrix, and that's one way to look at it. You can look at the wisdom traditions, the heavenly self and the earthly self, great. But we can also look at physics. So in physics, we have Newtonian physics and we have quantum physics. Newtonian physics works according to Newtonian laws. If I move this microphone away, there's a action-reaction. And every single time in the Newtonian realm, there will be an action-reaction. We have the Newtonian laws. They're always true. And we have a quantum realm, which has quantum laws, where you can be bilocated at the same time, where it's just different principles exist. You can move faster than the speed of light because 2 things are, like the double slit experiment, 2 things are moving at exactly the same time, even though they're other sides of the galaxy. From a Newtonian perspective, that's not possible. So Dan Siegel speaks about this very, very beautifully, the professor of interpersonal neurobiology. And when I did a masterclass with him with the IDG Summit, Inner Development Goals Summit in Stockholm last year, he basically summarizes it to say, we as human inhibit two separate realms. The Newtonian realm with Newtonian laws, the quantum realm with quantum laws. And he's pressure tested this with all the leading scientists in both the classical physics. So again, okay, both of these exist. They're archetypes. They show up everywhere. But the issue is the disconnection between the two of them. And because the spiritual world was, let's say, so used and abused, not just by patriarchy, there's a lot of patriarchy in the church, like only men can be priests and, you can go on and on there. Because there was a lot of wounding, a lot of collective trauma that accumulated in the spiritual world. You can think of the Crusades, you can think of like so many things that had actually, Alan Watts once said more people have been killed in the name of God than for any other cause. So when you have that amount of collective pain, at some point something needs to break. And what broke was in the 17th century, people said enough of this crap. Like we're done. Like we have science, objectivity. Those are things that are rational, that are scientifically measurable. Those are the things we value. And this spiritual, whatever religious, whatever intuitive stuff, that is not valuable.
Away with you.
And it created a schism. It's the scientific revolution. It's the age of enlightenment. It's the foundation of the science of economics. And
isn't it interesting? It probably obviously was imbalanced before, but isn't it interesting that the age of science became known as the age of enlightenment? And now we're coming back to trying to swing the pendulum back and go, hey, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, and the science is catching up, right? As we all know, with what ancient wisdom traditions have always known. But there's that schism, and it's very, very real. Very practically, if I was going to stand up in front of a group of people and deliver a speech, if I told them, I had a dream last night and I think this is what you should hear versus here's what the latest Harvard and MIT research says about the topic, they're going to be much more impressed by the latter.
Right.
By default.
Yeah.
By default, we tend to prioritize the concrete, the specific, the material, the objective, the rational. And we tend to deprioritize the intuitive, the spiritual, and so on.
And for those people that are listening and going, yeah, but what's wrong with that? What do you have to say about, the implications of this collective trauma of sort of being disconnected from spirit self? What happens then? Or what are we seeing now?
So imagine this metaphor. So one leg in my life. So let's say we have these two aspects of our being, right? The Newtonian and the quantum. So you can imagine it like one leg is in the spirit world and one leg is in the world of action. So now imagine walking through life just with the foot in action. Like I can hop faster than you can walk, but I'm going to get pretty tired pretty quickly. Doesn't mean you can't get through life hopping on one leg. We can. Go ahead. You can hop your whole life on one leg. But it's tiring. And I can even hop faster than you can walk. But in the long term, I'm going to get really, really tired. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just tiring. Is the world tired? What is the number one disease today? Is mental health. $2 trillion with the World Health Organization recently published. $2 trillion is going on mental health. And what are the two main types of mental health, the issues that our people have? Anxiety and depression. What is anxiety in trauma language? Hyperactivation. What is depression in trauma language? Disassociation. It's too much. So we either fight or we run away. Because it's tiring.
Yeah.
So nothing wrong with it. We can continue we can continue like this, like this forever, but it's just simply disbalanced. And that's also when we speak about development, and we can now take a different lens to this. We can take the development lens to the spiritual and to the material. And there's such a thing as outer development, like technological development, scientific development,
economic development.
We all know the economy. You look at the graphs and it's gone like this in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
GDP per capita has gone from, I don't know, I'm going to make it up, like $1,000 per capita to $50,000 per person in the last 100 years. Technological development, we all know, right? What's allowing us even to do this podcast, like incredible. And that is all outer development, great. But we also have inner development. Inner development, developing our inner competencies. And of course, you can go for anyone listening if you want to learn more about the science of inner development, because yes, there's science in both inner and outer. You can look at innerdevelopmentgoals.org and you can look at the competency framework and you can see all the science-based skills, qualities, and competencies that will actually rebalance the world again if we invest much more energy in building or developing also our inner worlds. So again, same thing, inner, outer, up, down, spiritual, material.
Yeah.
But again, it's really about creating the balance.
And earlier you were saying that there was a study commissioned and completed about how much we as individuals and we as a collective around the world are investing in outer development versus inner development. What was that figure?
Yeah, I don't think there was a scientific study. It was just me and ChatGPT.
Okay, well, we'll take it with a grain of salt.
Take it with a grain of salt because it's not objective, remember?
Right.
This is not scientific, not objective. This is just my sense.
Yeah.
So clearly it's not as valuable as if Harvard published it. But my sense was about pretty much aligned with what ChatGPT came up with, which is 85 to 95% of all human attention and focus and resources and time and money over the last 300 years has gone into outer development, and 5 to 15%, let's average it at 10, has gone into inner development. Even if it's 70 on outer and 30 on inner, it's still not balanced. And we were discussing this before, like how does this show up in today's society? It shows up by people leaving university and feeling like, I developed a lot of knowledge and I developed my intellect, but I don't really know how to be a good partner in relationship. I don't really know how to play the politics in my organization where, who you know is more important than what you know.
I don't know how to build community.
I don't know how to build. I don't know how to be a member of community. I don't actually know how to listen to my own inner guidance, so I keep getting confused by the outer signals in life. Should I do this? Should I? Indecisiveness.
Chasing or escapism versus sitting still.
And just confusion. Like, how do I know whether I should do this or that? You're trying to compare based on data. But if we were more connected to what's called in the research our inner compass, then I would be able to very clearly say, yeah, I'm moving in that direction because I feel it. I don't need to try to figure it out. It's too complex to figure out intellectually. It's draining. And you actually never have the right answer. And this is just one of the 23. We also have empathy and compassion, which is, significantly lacking in my life, let alone, in some of the conflict areas of the world.
So let's move into that. I want to speak about one of the last axes that we haven't spoken a little bit into as a jumping board, but this idea about collectivism versus individualism.
Yeah.
And how, we're recording this in Dubai. We're quite close to the conflict in Gaza. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are really struggling with, following their inner compass on this. And I'm going to use myself as an example. I recently had a really in-depth conversation with a beautiful Palestinian friend of mine about why, from her perspective, I wasn't using my platform more to bring about the injustices carried out in Gaza. And my point that I'm trying to hold is this centrist point of view, which is obviously unpopular for both sides, where I really want to send out a lot of compassion and love and understand that there's no evil and there's no saint, but we're all of these things. And I want to create space for all Israelis, for all Palestinians, and for all Lebanese, and for all of humanity to come together and say, hey, how can we support in this? And she has left me with this question that I've been pondering for a while now, where she said, Erica, what you're trying to do is beautiful, but it's premature in this collective trauma reconciliation process. We're not even at reconciliation. We need to clearly identify the oppressors from who is really being victimized. And there needs to be this reconciliation and this apology before we get into these safe spaces where we invite everyone in. And I'm super curious, with all of the collective trauma work you're doing in the Balkans and all of the studying you've done on an intellectual but also spiritual level, what is your take on this?
I mean, there's many ways to answer that question, but it's certainly a process. Collective healing, now we're in a field of hot trauma.
Hot trauma, what's that?
Hot trauma meaning the trauma is being very actively played out.
For sure.
Trauma is actually driving our behaviors.
Yeah.
It's like taking the highway of life. You're driving on the highway of life, and you have the highway behind you, and you copy the highway and you put it in front of you, and you say that's the future. That's not the future. That's a compulsive repetition of the past. And again, nothing wrong with that, because the past is being expressed so we can bring it to awareness and we can integrate it or heal it. Or it's like in our individual journeys, it's not just that whatever upsets I have in my life are showing up as setups for my growth. It's my unconscious showing me what areas I still need to work on. But my soul has created these opportunities so that I have chosen this. I'm not a victim to my circus. I've on a higher self, not on an ego self. Of course, the ego self wants to avoid all of this, but on a higher self that has free choice, because the ego doesn't have free choice, right? But my higher self, my soul, has free choice. So from that perspective, I'm creating these opportunities and I'm calling them into my life so that I can heal. This is also Jung's law of synchronicity. And similarly on the collective level, all of these things are there. Whether they're in the dark lake underground or whether they're now being expressed, they're there. So you could say it's very positive that things are now being seen, because they were always there, now they're being seen. But the question is, how do we respond? It's a sort of like trauma and personal development work. This distinction between reaction and response is always there. Viktor Frankl's good old in between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. So instead of jumping into reacting and then it becomes ping pong, the question is then, how do we create that space between stimulus and response? But having said that, coming back to hot trauma, so we're in a space of hot trauma where stimulus and response are almost glued together. And it's almost impossible to distinguish them, almost by definition, in a space of hot trauma, because you're wondering, like, am I safe? Things are happening that are, in real time, that you just need to run. But then when you're in a space of cold trauma, like we're in the Balkans, the war ended now 4 years ago. So we've had 24 years where the trauma has gone from hot and now has moved underground. And it's easier to work on it when it's easier to create that space between. So we cannot say we're all one when we're in a space of cold trauma. We probably cannot even say we're all one when we're in a space of cold trauma unless we create spaces to integrate that trauma and understand what are the lessons it's telling us.
So am I understanding you correctly that in times of hot trauma, like we currently are in this region and in many parts of the world, but particularly I'm shedding light to the conflict in Gaza at the moment, that, collective healing is not even something we can prepare for.
Exactly. It's like, you're asking someone, something very advanced, like, do they want to go and sit in silence for 2 weeks or something, but they're like fighting for their life.
Right.
It's like we're solving it from this level of consciousness, but the coherence level currently is extremely low. So even a ceasefire is a step upwards. And this is also, I understand the UN, there's like 140 countries have been repeatedly calling for a ceasefire over the last year plus, because that's then an evolution. Then we can say, okay, now at least there can be some pause. There can be a little bit of space where we can say, okay, what are we going to do about this? It's not just being this like hurt people. I mean, this is just, this has always been known, like bullies at school. You always look at their history, mostly abusive parents or abusive grandparents or assault of some version or ancestral trauma. And it's understandable. And if we look at it, then if you're holding a space for where all perspectives have been seen, and I was playing also with ChatGPT on this, the amount of persecution that's been inflicted on the Jewish people is tremendous through history, continuously. It's like, and it's been building up. And 2,000 years ago, you can find examples. It's for thousands of years. And then, of course, the ultimate scapegoating that happened in the Second World War, with Nazi Germany, was just catalyzed everything we've seen over the last 80 years. Because the amount of pain that was created there is tremendous.
And so is there anything we can do while this is going on? There seems to be a lot of pressure to choose sides, for example. And when I think about sides, I think about the drama triangle of a perpetrator, a hero, and a victim. And we do seem to live in a world where people are vying for who is the biggest victim.
Yeah.
And the way to dismantle that triangle, of course, is not to play any role. Don't become the hero that fights for the victim, or oppressed tries to push back the bully. Don't victimize. Don't become the oppressor. Just really disengage. But does that work in the collective as well?
Well, you can look at it this way. So there's a massive polarity currently between us and them in the two sides, and the bigger the polarity is, the more the tension is between. Like we are right and they're wrong. We're humans and they're animals. Or we're right and they're wrong. We're the victims or we're the victims or we're the victims. Like who's the bigger victim? Like you can sort of go into, and by taking a side, energetically you add to that polarity. So in a sense, taking a side does not move us to the next level, which is simply ceasefire. It makes it more difficult because it adds fuel to the fire of like, yes, and the outrage. It doesn't mean the outrage is not justified. It's absolutely justified on all sides. But that energy of outrage doesn't allow us to sit at the same table and say like, okay, you cannot, let's say Desmond Tutu and Mandela ran the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process in South Africa. You cannot run that place from outrage. You cannot run that process from outrage. You need your nervous system to be calm, at least to some degree, and then you can bring in consciousness to start shedding light on some of those underlying patterns and heal together. And this is, of course, having said that, this is extremely, extremely deep. I mean, I'm from the Balkans, and our trauma is thousands of years, and it's very, very deep. But when I'm connected through some of my friends on both the Israeli and Palestinian side, and my partner is Palestinian, some of my best friends are Israeli, I was just like, wow, this is astoundingly deep. Like, I'm just in disbelief of how deep it is. And in some way, when we say the Holy Land, it's so deep that if this polarity, if this tension is resolved in the Middle East, it's resolved on behalf of in the entire humanity. That's how catalytic my sense is of the importance of this, like, acupuncture point or portal or whatever you want to call it. From a spiritual perspective, or from a religious perspective, fighting from the Holy Land, or from a geopolitical perspective, or from a historical perspective, this is where many of the prophets have been, or whichever perspective you take. But when I managed to tap into that energy, it really, really is immensely, immensely powerful. And anything powerful can go both ways.
Yeah.
But my encouragement in this whole, let's say, this whole question of what can I do is, and we were speaking about this before, my conviction is that the worst idea in human history is we are better than them. And that's the same idea that drove Hitler in the Second World War to perpetuate the pain. Many, let's say, groups have a belief, the Serbs are better than the Croats are better than the Serbs. Religions, whatever, one version of Christianity or Islam is better than the other version of Christianity or Islam. So when I really, really, really distill it to what is the essential malfunction, what is the essential misunderstanding, what is the root cause misunderstanding, it's I'm better than you, I'm superior.
And so anytime you feel that you yourself are better than the other, what do you call for in that moment? Go, ooh, I'm noticing that I feel superior in this instance. What do you do?
I've been trained in this. My parents trained me to be superior. Like, they would tell me we're better than the other kids because of our genetics, because we're smarter, because we work harder, because, like...
So this is how the collective trauma has really impacted you individually.
Right. And, like, I'm special and I'm different was my core pattern when I started working on myself initially, like 20 years ago, when I did my Hoffman process of really going deep into the psychology and what did I inherit from my parents, both my mother and my father. So imagine 200 patterns. And you have to check off the ones you inherited from your father, and 200 patterns, check off the ones you inherited from your mother. And the main one for me was the sense of superiority. And then what that led to is a lot of judgment towards people, which is actually a very violent energy if you look at it. If I put you in a box and I say, this is Erica, but all of this is not Erica, that's actually extremely violent. Boxes have 90-degree angles. Your being, who you are is not, it doesn't fit into 90-degree angles. If anything, it's divine. And your ability and all of our abilities to tap into our archetypal energies and channel them. And we all have, even in many of the traditions, we say, God is made in, humans are made in God's image. You can interpret that in different ways, but there is a divine spark in all of us. If it's not, there's a physical spark, like, are we physical beings living a spiritual life or spiritual beings living a physical life? And yeah, in my own journey, it's been a lot of, one of my friends called it like also this energy of like musting. like you must do this, it has to be this way.
Yes.
And it's this constant energy of, and then when I did some deeper work, I realized how violent that energy is towards others. It's psychologically and emotionally highly
toxic,
violent.
Yeah.
So what I've done in my own journey is, of course, like anything else, all growth starts with awareness. Then making a different choice from that awareness and practicing over time until there's a shift. I don't get those thoughts automatically anymore so often. I don't get those feelings automatically. I get feelings which are like much more expansive and can hold all of who you are rather than just some aspects that I prefer to see. And it's really interesting also to link this to some of the marriage research. A colleague of mine was telling me he was on the counseling service of London, the city level counseling service for marriages. He was serving as on the board there. And they did research to understand what are the key issues in marriages. And they found that there was one single factor that impacted the collapse of marriages the most, which is people start to create images of each other and start to behave towards each other in line with that image, but stop seeing the incredible diversity of the human that's actually behind the facade.
That makes perfect sense.
And then they get surprised when someone does something. Oh, you're not like that, or you don't say things like that. It's like really,
And then it feeds into the Gottman research of the 7 sins of relating, or whatever that is. I think he calls them the 7
horsemen of
evil horsemen of the relationship
7
apocalypse.
horsemen of the apocalypse.
Right.
Or I think it was 4 or something.
Yeah. It's like stonewalling and a number of other.
Exactly.
Yeah. Behaviors.
Yeah, very much links to that research. Yeah, so main message from my side on this is be very wary of any type of thinking that's like we are better than them. We, the C-suite, are better than the employees. We, the middle managers. We, the people of a certain skin color. We, people who have a certain economic status. Whoever the we isn't my family better than, because that's the fundamental, because that then leads to othering. Because if I'm better than you, then you're not like me and I can other you. In trauma language, it's othering. And once you other someone, then it's justified to do anything to them. From abusing to exploiting to killing even, right? Because they're not like us. And in this region, a lot of people have argued, that we have a case of modern day slavery in some way. Because if they're not like us, whatever, it's fine. And it's energetic. It doesn't mean that people shouldn't look for better opportunities that they have. For some people, working here might be the best opportunity they have. And as long as they're fairly treated, all good. But it's the energetic of like superiority. It's the energetic of, and then that is the fundamental disconnect. And then it perpetuates through the ages, it perpetuates through different contexts. And many people have made the direct link from Second World War to what's happening today.
I think that's a great place to start of a very, very long process of just where do you see yourself, or where do you think you're better than someone else?
Yeah.
And then start on that, and then do the work.
Exactly.
Do the work, do the self-healing.
That's what you can do.
Yeah.
That's what you can do.
This is what it always comes back down to. And we're often, again, I guess it's back to the outer world or the inner world. I feel that the matrix and the outer world are often additionally pressuring us to do something in the outer world. But actually, in most of these circumstances, it's really focusing on yourself, and your inner development is probably the most powerful thing we can do, coming back to rebalancing the whole world and the collective trauma that we're experiencing. If we can individually balance that within ourselves, and everyone, or the majority of people on the planet, can start moving in that direction, then we'll see some healing happening on the collective level.
Absolutely. And all the research supports that. Bob Keegan calls it the shift. Bob Keegan at Harvard, researcher on adult development, calls it the shift from socialized self to self-authoring. In coaching, oftentimes they call it as a shift from victim to master.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke about Viktor Frankl, who calls it the shift from the reactive to the creative.
I like that one, reactive
mind.
to creative.
In psychology, it's called shifting from external locus of control to internal locus of control. All of them are saying the same thing, which is focus radically on what you can control. A radical focus on what I can control. And owning my own experience. And choosing to manage or work with what I have that's right here. Why? Because if each of us did that, all of a sudden the collective would shift. Because what's the collective? Like, try to change your wife or your, partner, or try to we have no power to change anyone else except ours. Zero. Ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, it's not within my realm of authority.
Yeah.
I cannot, as the CEO of Google, I cannot tell the CEO of Alibaba what to do. It's not in my realm of authority.
Yeah.
They have different shareholders. They have different structures. So it's similarly like, but I'm the king and the queen of my own being. And this is where I can do the work. This is where I can look into the basement and see what's there and do the shadow work. This is where I can look into all my judgments.
Yeah.
And see, who am I judging, and turn the sword inwards and then look inside.
I love that. Turn the sword inwards. Nikola, we've run out of time.
All right. Just starting.
Just getting started. So as usual, we're going to have a whole nother session, I think. But very quickly, we're going to have all of this in the show notes, but where can people find you and the work that you're doing?
So we have two websites. One is transfigurationadvisory.com. This is the work that we do in catalyzing cultural transfiguration in organizations. Most of our clients are in the Middle East, but we also, our two main regions of focus are the Balkans and the Middle East. Perhaps not the two most easiest regions of the world to work in, but alas.
For cultural change. Yeah.
For culture change, but alas, this is our work. And there we pretty much do just culture work. So a bit like the iPhone back in the day, we just do one thing and we do it really, really, really masterfully. And with a lot of passion. So that's it. It's like one offer to help improve the culture in organizations. And then we have Project Light Foundation, which is projectlight.one, www.projectlight.one. And this is our inner social impact platform, where we support projects contributing to a lighter and more beautiful life. In the Balkans, projects on the topics of collective trauma, and we are running one collective trauma integration process this year. We did an in-person retreat in Bosnia. This year, we work on the area of transformational learning, which is vertical development, and the key vertical development shift being from external locus of control to internal locus of control, or socialized self to self-authoring, helping especially young people. We work with young leaders and current leaders and future leaders, but mostly our intention over time is to work more with future leaders. And then finally, also awareness and intentionality. That's more bringing awareness to the way things are as they are. This comes from the awareness-based systems change theory from MIT and Otto Scharmer theory U. So all we need to do is inject awareness into the system, and the system will find ways to self-correct. So this is bringing a light to ways in which the society is working today.
I love it. If people want to know more, projectlight.one and transfigurationadvisory.com. We'll have that all in the show notes. Nikola, I really, really want to thank you for coming on board today and sharing all of your beautiful wisdom with us.
Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, it's really
beautiful
great.
What's in the space between us.
Yeah, thank you.
Much love.
Much love. Hey there. If you like this episode and you're getting some beautiful transmissions or are feeling inspired to support this podcast in any way, the best way to do that is to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on YouTube, or wherever it is that you're plugging into the Enlightened DXB podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at EnlightenedDXB. If you want to reach out to any of the guests we have on the show, you can check out their profiles and their work at www.enlightendxb.com. And for those of you in Dubai looking for community, retreats, or additional resources, you can also sign up to our emailing list there. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, I wish you more joy, more ease, and a little sprinkle of grace.